To set the stage, I want to spend a few minutes first talking about the current dominant approach to providing mental health treatment, which I'm going to refer to here as the corporate medical model. So the corporate medical model revolves around a conception of mental illness as a cluster of biologically based symptoms, so much like a physical disease. So as a result, it supports the use of psychiatric drugs to treat virtually all forms of mental distress, and it de-emphasizes psychosocial influences. So the reason this is relevant to what we're talking about today is that this is the default for delivering psychedelics. So it's worth spending a few minutes looking at how well this model has performed. On the one hand, we've seen massive growth in the use of psychiatric drugs. So focusing on antidepressants, we can see increases in various countries of 25 to 100% over the period 2000 through 2016. If we look at global psychiatric drug revenues, we can see that since 1990, which is a few years after Prozac was first introduced in North America, that there's been just a massive increase. If we turn now to the effects on mental health, the picture doesn't look quite as good. So if we look at the prevalence of major mental disorders between 1990 and 2017, we see really significant increases with anxiety, substance abuse disorders, and major depressive disorder leading the pack. This next chart, shows a measure that health economists often use and public health professors. It's known as disability-adjusted life years. So these are years of life that are lost to disability or death, in this case as a result of mental health and substance abuse disorders. And we can see that over the period 1990 to 2017, the worldwide, the level for the global population is estimated to have been roughly flat, and the level for the US has increased. In addition to the kind of not particularly impressive effects on mental health, this model has also created tremendous costs. So between, that should actually say 1996 and 2013, so I apologize for that. But between 1996 and 2013, the costs for treating mental illness in the U.S. rose from being third or fourth in the pack, heart conditions used to be the leader, to being the most expensive category of health condition to treat in the U.S. And if we look at the distribution of mental health expenditures, we see that the share accounted for by retail prescription drugs has risen tremendously from 8% in 1986 to 22% or 27% rather in 2014. So this shouldn't be surprising if we think about the tremendous reliance that the corporate medical model places on the use of psychiatric drugs. The question I want to ask is why? If this model, which has had kind of middling efficacy at best and is so incredibly costly, if this model is so costly and doesn't work that well, why has it persisted? Why do we see it? And what I want to argue is that the reason that the corporate medical model persists is that it reflects and perpetuates the extractive economic pattern that characterizes our entire economic system more generally, and really our entire society. So this is a pattern in which different forms of disconnection enable the extraction of resources from people and communities, which ultimately impairs mental health. So I can be a bit more specific about that. It's a pattern in which outposts of giant corporations that are beholden to Wall Street have replaced local businesses on Main Street throughout the US and many other parts of the world. As a result, financial capital, the financial proceeds of local economic activity, are extracted from local communities to remote shareholders, and they're no longer available to recirculate within communities where they could generate additional local investment and economic activity. It's a pattern in which remote corporate managers who are disconnected from local ecosystems make decisions about the use or the deployment, we can say, of human and natural resources in those local ecosystems, in those local communities that don't account or don't fully account for the effects on the health and well-being of these forms of natural and human capital. So in a sense, this natural and human capital is also being extracted. It's a pattern in which social disconnection, resulting from the ascent of hyper-individualistic values and the decline of civic institutions over the last 50 years, has extracted social capital from the local social systems that are necessary to support robust local economic activity. So social disconnection leading to the extraction of social capital, just as economic disconnection leads to the extraction of financial capital, human capital, and natural capital. And in terms of mental health, the effects of social disconnection, economic disconnection, and this ongoing pattern of extraction has been to create widespread despair and feelings of meaninglessness, and ultimately to disconnect people from themselves. So we can, if we look at data, from cross-country data, we can see some pretty stark evidence of the association between the extractive economic pattern and mental health. So this chart, again, this is across countries, and this is a fairly robust statistical relationship. There are lots of other variables that aren't shown here, but that are being controlled for. We see a very distinct correlation between economic inequality, which is the chief economic consequence of the extractive pattern, and mental illness. Similarly, we see a distinct association between economic inequality and illegal drug use, which is a proxy for addiction. So one of the main reasons, perhaps the main reason, why general practitioners prescribing antidepressants to tens of thousands of people or more who come in complaining of depression, anxiety, who have substance abuse disorders, one of the reasons that that's not so effective is that it's not treating the root cause of the problem. It's not treating the extractive pattern that's creating widespread mental distress in the first place. So it would be counterproductive to deliver psychedelics or psychedelic-assisted therapy using an economic model that embodies the same extractive patterning contributing to widespread distress in the first place. So the pollination approach is a community-based alternative to the corporate medical model. It's rooted in natural systems principles. It's what's referred to as a biomimetic approach. It begins with the simple truth that communities are living systems. And like any other type of natural system or any other sort of complex system, the health and well-being of the members of the system, of the people who live in communities, is intrinsically interdependent with the health of the system itself. The pollination approach emphasizes the importance of reconnecting people to local social and economic systems as a critical component of their healing. So it does so through community building activities, group integration, group therapy, and also by engaging in partnerships with local organizations that are based in the local communities where where community well-being centers are delivering the pollination approach. It works with these organizations to reconnect people to community, social, and economic systems. Just imagine somebody who's been suffering from major depressive disorder and goes in and receives psychedelic-assisted therapy using psilocybin, and their depression lifts. If one of the contributing factors to their depression was the toxic environment that they're living in, and then they're thrust back into that environment without any support, without any attempt to actually reconnect them to community systems and to revitalize those systems themselves, then the chances of the beneficial effects of this therapy the chances that they will persist are much smaller. Okay. So the clicker is not working. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. Seems to be, okay, here we go. Okay, so the pollination approach reconnects people to community systems to cultivate individual and collective well-being. So just to spend a few more minutes on this to kind of do a compare, I'll do a compare and contrast with between a corporate clinic and a community well-being center, which is enacting the pollination approach. So the corporate clinic in this case, what I have in mind is a clinic in a local community that's owned by a giant corporation. Okay, so the corporate clinic is first and foremost a profit center serving shareholders, whereas a community well-being center, a pollinator, in other words, is a civic institution serving the local community. A corporate clinic focuses on treating the symptoms of mental illness. A community well-being center attempts to address the systemic roots of widespread mental distress. The corporate clinic takes an individualistic approach to treatment. A pollinator, a community well-being center, focuses on community-based healing, as I've already discussed a bit. The corporate clinic takes a siloed approach to managing illness. A pollinator takes a holistic approach to cultivating well-being. A corporate clinic is remotely owned, and it extracts financial returns from the community to corporate shareholders. A community well-being center, a pollinator, is locally owned, and it circulates financial returns within the community, helping to heal the community economic system along with individuals and community social systems. The corporate clinic has centralized corporate management that takes a one-size-fits-all approach to delivering care. A community well-being center has a multi-stakeholder governance structure, which is much better able to respond to and address local needs and conditions. So I want to call attention to, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but a few organizations that I'm familiar with that are developing or prototyping different elements of the pollination approach. Oh, but before I do that, I wanted to speak about potential economic benefits for a minute. Right, so what are the potential economic benefits of pursuing this type of approach, of actually creating well-being? Oftentimes we hear that this type of approach, that the corporates can do things much cheaper, and and as a result, they're going to end up dominating the field for that reason. But there are massive potential economic benefits from actually lifting people out of depression. So again, focusing on depression, for each $1 spent on direct costs associated with someone who has major depressive disorder, there's an additional $6.60 of additional costs. These include the costs of treating comorbid illnesses that such a person might have. They also include the lost workplace productivity that someone who has MDD, the lost workplace productivity from someone who is afflicted with MDD. And this doesn't even start to really get at the full amount of economic benefits. It doesn't take into account the savings in social welfare costs from reconnecting people who have had these completely disconnecting afflictions to the economic system. Imagine if we could reclaim even just a fraction of the thousands of disability-adjusted life years lost to major depressive disorder. Imagine not just the effects on individual well-being, but also the economic benefits of doing that. Okay, so in terms of a few specific organizations, Rainfall Medicine here in Portland and Nautilus Sanctuary in New York on the East Coast are both community-based clinics that are placing mental and behavioral health at the center of a holistic approach to well-being, so very consonant with the pollination approach. Brooklyn Psychedelic Society. Brooklyn Psychedelic Society engages in a number of community building activities. They have one program called the Journey Cohort Program, which provides support for people before and after legal psychedelic experiences. In addition, they're en route to becoming the country's first psychedelic co-op, a democratically governed, community-based healing center. So they're attempting to address not only social disconnection, but economic disconnection as well. The Synthesis Institute. The Synthesis Institute, as some of you may know, has been enacting a form of purpose-driven governance known as steward ownership. Now, you're going to hear more details about steward ownership I think in just a few minutes. I wanted to call them out, to call this out here because this type of ownership structure, which prioritizes purpose over profit, is also critical to supporting the pollination approach and to community-based care in general. ACER integration. So this is Dr. Rosalind Watts' new project. It's a 12-month integration program. It's online. Okay, I've got one more slide. Thanks. Online integration and training that's rooted in modern psychological theory as well as the ancient codes of nature. Again, very consonant with the pollination approach. So I lied, I have 2 more slides, but I'll move through them very quickly. So the final project I want to mention, so all of these organizations are in one way or another attempting to create or recreate these sort of dense mycelial webs of interconnection in local communities in order to support individual and collective well-being. But what's needed to really, but what's also needed is a way of creating a dense mycelial web of connections among the community well-being centers in different communities. The localized nature of this approach means that there needs to be a way to share information and resources and also to share services across these centers in order to offset some of the potential scale-based cost advantages that corporate clinics might have. So I'm working on a new initiative called the Community Wellbeing Collaborative in collaboration with several others, which seeks to do this. It's an ecosystem support organization that provides startup guidance and resources as well as shared services to community-based well-being centers. And it will help to offset some of the potential cost advantages of the corporates, but it will also be cooperatively owned and governed. So it will do so without replicating the centralized pattern that we're trying to change. So it's going to function in collaboration with several ecosystem service partners. The 2 main initial membership groups are community clinics and psychedelic societies. And if you're interested in learning more about this, I have a slide deck that I'm happy to share. And so there's my email, and I think my time is up, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Bennett. Really interesting considerations. Please stay up here with us. We'll hear from our next speaker, and then together they'll take some questions. Our next speaker is Tyler Norris. Tyler is a social entrepreneur and trusted advisor to philanthropies and partnerships working to improve the health of people and place. Most recently, he has served as the founding CEO of Wellbeing Trust, an impact philanthropy with a mission to advance the mental, social, and spiritual health of the nation. Tyler currently is board chair of Naropa University, co-chair of the CEO Alliance for Mental Health, and a board member for Mindful Philanthropy, and the National Academies of Sciences Child Wellbeing Forum. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you. So good to be here with all of you. And Bennett, I'm afraid I resemble a person who's been an executive in that medical industrial complex for far too long and then spent the last 6 years trying to unwind that through Wellbeing Trust by creating a deeper movement for what creates human flourishing in the first place. I just want to say that the way you describe the extractiveness and what's actually happening, what our learning was in our philanthropy is almost everything about what we're doing as an economy right now is producing the mental health challenges that we face. And so we have an extraordinary opportunity in this conversation. So lucky me, just home from the playa and a family wedding. I'm not sure which needed more decompression. But I got to spend the last few days with my sister in the forests of this beautiful, majestic state. And her flowers, her gardens, her orchard, and the kind of regaling me on log walks about the plants and the people of this state, this place. Like this giant, which on the left, my sister Julie, who's you'll see in a minute, I've gotten her permission to talk about her a little bit today. There's this beautiful piece, but as you see on the right, that's the other side of the tree and how vulnerable it is on the bank right now, and a reminder that these extraordinary, majestic giants that provide such ecosystem services are just as vulnerable as that very same tree on the right, just from down below. Julie started off my little immersion outside of Philomath by honoring the people and the land who once lived there by teaching me about Chenepefu, which is the blue elderberry, which she's holding there. And of course, many of you are familiar with its benefits of beautiful for jams and wine and its immune benefits, which she uses. But also the way in which this elderberry actually holds the water in place. It's actually a holder of water that then bears fruit. And I asked her, tell me a little bit more about that. And she goes, Tyler, the plants know what to do. And she learned this from the elders in this area. They hold the water, they stabilize the land, they give fruit. This is the wisdom and services of plants. Now, the Chenepefu people, which is the name of the people whose identity of the plant and the place and the people all the same, of course, were marched off the land and pushed into the industry of that time, which was subtle agriculture. And we know what happened as the vanishing nature of not only that band, even though they will remind us we are still here. Right? So Julie gave me permission to talk about her health because she suffers mightily from Parkinson's disease. And not only does the elderberry, but also psilocybin support her healing path and has been central to her journey. So my curiosity, building on what BENNET said, is what are we talking about actually building here? Because Julie doesn't need an industry. She needs a community-centered care ecosystem that wraps around her because she has, at times, food security issues, housing issues. There are toxics down the way. There are all kinds of civic issues in her county that are challenging even the use, as we talked about previously. So the curiosity that I have for all of us who are interested in, however we want to call it, I think Kevin framed it beautifully, is it an industry? Is it a field or a field of fields or a community of communities? What is it we're really trying to build here so that it would not only support folks that have conditions like hers in these centers with all their protocols, but where there's clinical care that would fit that, but also for the indigenous people who have traditional ways to use the medicine that are fully outside what we're talking about. Black people who for 500 plus years have been using and preserving plant medicine in this country, who frankly are in a conversation around most dialogues like this, is how do we liberate the plant medicine from the psychedelic field? So the curiosity is, how do we build a field, an ecosystem that is worthy of the medicine and worthy of the different ways that we're going to use and experience medicine, use cases, if we actually will. So I want to talk about a psilocybin economy, a little bit of safety and quality as a health system executive, and then what does this mean for leadership and our dialogue that will follow. So what do we really mean here in this Kairos moment, this very propitious moment? What do we mean about a psilocybin economy? Do we mean an economy that's built around the use and the cultivation and the sale and the enjoyment of psilocybin? Only that way, an economy-centric? Or do we mean an economy that looks and grows and feels and behaves akin to the sentience and the symbiotic nature of the medicines themselves? Who's harnessing what? In fact, are we just at the beginning of trying to form up an industry that, with the best of intention, falls prey to what was just described? So I would like to ask a question. What does it look like to build a field with ventures, with businesses that have living wage, family wage, community incomes that regenerate and return profits to communities, as was just described, that is in the ethos of the medicines that we're serving and not the other way around? Because I will tell you, having been part of multi-billion-dollar behemoths in a $3 trillion economy, these large institutions of health have become a threat to our health. Let's not go down that path. We already know where that takes us. So when we built Wellbeing Trust to advance them, literally reverse the trends that Bennett was talking about, we've had extraordinary doubling every 10 years of rates of suicide, addiction, etc. How do you actually turn the tide? We reverse engineered social movements starting with abolition through suffrage, environment, civil rights, all the way to marriage equality, and said, what do strong social movements have that have fidelity to their outcomes and are actually sustainable and powerful at the end of the day? What can we learn? We identified these 7 elements. We don't have time to go into them today, but over the coming days, I hope some of you that are interested will say, what does it take to build a social movement that's worthy of what our mission is, but that is strong? For example, and I'm just thinking as you move from what's my venture in this room to what's our field, to how do we build a movement that builds civic muscle, that actually allows us to build a local democracy that has social capital, trust, reciprocity, cohesion, that actually allows us to make wise choices around this. How do we exchange data? How do we align on communications? How do we actually build leadership and alliances of leadership across different points of view and sectors? Again, regulatory environment, philanthropy, the purveyors, civic groups, people without titles after their names who want to be part of that. What does this look like? Because strong social movements build all 7 of these, they nurture them carefully, and when they did, they were able to see population level impacts. So I'm going to encourage us to keep thinking this way. Secondly, I mentioned I was going to talk about quality and safety. In the healthcare sector, we talk about the quadruple aim. So when we think, what does quality look like? And it's going to be very important when we go back to what Angela started off us with this morning, and where the Oregon Health Authority is with a fairly minimalist, skeletal approach, which I think is a very beautiful opportunity for field building, is to ask, therefore, what are we going to bring that would deliver quality? So the first in any, getting used to this version of it, I'm going to start in the lower left-hand corner. Quality is about the care experience, best quality care. And care today not only means quality of the exact experience, but includes the assessment and referral of social and non-medical needs. So when we start getting into this client intake form and the journey and the safety plans that are somewhat still underdeveloped, and you as a field have a chance to help shape, what does quality look like for the patient or the person, human being? We're not trying to create an industry with consumers here. Human beings are prosumers. They're producers, co-producers of our health. What does it mean to actually deliver quality across the care process that includes the socioeconomic environment of the individual? That's number one. At best cost, what's affordable? How do people get access? As a health plan executive, I will tell you that it is this quadruple aim that will eventually get these medicines covered, if they ever are, because we deliver on these. Best quality care at best cost. The third is, does it improve the overall health of the community and the population? Is the overall strategy regenerative and helpful to the community in which it's based? And fourth, does it care for the caregiver? How does it actually produce the well-being of the individual who is the sitter, practitioner, however we want to call this? At Naropa University, where I'm board chair, we're particularly interested in this, and I'm thrilled with the attempt at low barrier to entry for licensed practitioners. I think that will serve well. I think the Oregon preferencing of local Oregonians will serve well. But as the board chair of a university that's training master's level clinicians in preserving high quality care, right use of power, rooted in contemplative practice. I'm going to say that we have an extraordinary opportunity to raise the bar on what the skills look like of who people come to. And that because this democracy leaves it open, it therefore is the opportunity of this field. How shall we raise the skills and competencies and inclusion of the field so that it can really meet people in a good way? That's what quality actually looks like. And so therefore, in the immediate time, we have, as was described earlier, in these coming weeks and months, you have, as leaders in this field, an opportunity to help shape these rules and regulations. How the client intake will occur, the entire assessment and referral process is still available for some fine-tuning. How will you build out the strength of safety plans so that if you have a person who has a treatment-resistant condition and they find themselves with a large dose of medicine, they're not sitting with someone who's unprepared. There's, in fact, safety and backup plan so that we care with integrity for the individuals that we're hosting. And how do we ensure a great integration experience? These are the most immediate opportunities that we have as a field. But I'm going to ask you to say it's much, much broader than that. And how you work with local entities, the one, BENNET, you just talked about, APA, the American Psychedelics Practitioner Association, how you learn from the ethos of extraordinary organizations like Fireside, whose way of interacting with people with dignity in the first place. To me, that's what needs to transition all the way up through our mental health and criminal justice systems, is exactly the kind of ethos we're learning from organizations like Fireside. That's what it means to do this well. Now, as a longtime resident of Denver, the mayor of Denver has been a friend of mine for 30 years. We're talking as MAPS, and we all head to Denver in June of 2023. What is a psychedelic city? Well, there, the police chief with 988 rollout has made psychedelic use its lowest possible priority. That's terrific. But as 988 rolls out as an alternative to 911, and we're having a question of having someone to call, someone to come, someplace to go, and redesigning our criminal justice response around harm reduction as much as possible, I'm going to suggest not only do we need to tap into that more effectively, but what we are able to bring through the ethos of this plant medicine will transform that system in itself and the law enforcement through the process. That's actually the opportunity of this if we don't behave like an industry. But instead, if we behave like a community who is allowing the wisdom of the medicine to transform our social systems that are producing the mental health that we're struggling with in the first place. That's what I hope that we will get into a conversation here about. So, final piece is what I hope we move to in dialogue here. Many of you in this room, I know because I've been talking with some of you, are thinking about your new venture, and that's really exciting. Or you're a practitioner thinking about, maybe I want to get into this or build this. How will you think about your role? Who are you becoming in the process of building a venture in this democratic opportunity that Oregon's providing that is shaping a field that's worthy of who you are and who the medicine is? And then as the industry, trade groups, field partners come together in this state, and that is increasingly happening, how will we shape a field that is worthy of the medicine? The people we're serving, the plants that we're working for and with, in a system that is regenerative to people and community. And then how more broadly as a movement do we think about the data sharing, the communication alignment, the leadership, the kinds of proof points of quality that need to be named and adapted, so that we are building a field in which new entrants have guidance, guardrails on what works. I love the council's response here to, well, first mover or mid-mover once you've seen, that's to be seen. I thought it was a fabulous response. I will tell you, however, that those organizations that don't deliver the quadruple aim on quality, that aren't part of building a movement that's worthy of the medicine, won't survive, whether the first movers or the last movers. So when you build for quality, you build with these multiple ways that the use and enjoyment of these medicines will occur, and this field behaves not like an extractive industry, but as a field leader for healing the pain and suffering, like my sister's facing, like so many people in your lives are facing. That is an industry that's worthy of our lives. And so I know our moderator is going to come back up, and we're going to begin to have a conversation about how then, as leaders, shall we lead? Who are we? What shall we do individually, as businesses, and as a field to not only help shape Oregon, but frankly, a lot of states are watching. A lot of counties, like mine on the Idaho side, I'm an Idahoan, are backing out. You look at California and others moving this off the ballot, they're looking for quality. They're looking for leadership from states like Oregon and Colorado to see what and how we do this. So, thank you.
That was great.
Really, really interesting, thought-provoking, important questions to be asking ourselves and the people who want to be involved in this business. When Tom Eckert gave his opening remarks, he talked about the gravity of today and the gravity of, and the reality of having a state legal psilocybin services program. And we talked about being able to shape parts of that, including shaping part of the OHA rules right now that are coming out. But it sounds like, I mean, we have the opportunity to shape much more than that, right? We are shaping movements, we are shaping fields, we are shaping communities, not just those individual businesses that are coming together to create this whole psilocybin economy. So one of the questions I think I wanted to pose first was, in looking at building community-oriented, community-centered, purpose-driven, regenerative businesses, what is an ownership model? What are business owners, people who are interested in developing a psilocybin-related business under the state legal system, what is an ownership model that would support that kind of approach? You know, is it something employee-owned? Is it a co-op? What kind of models do you think might work here?
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily one approach. I think oftentimes we focus on specific structures and forms, and a structure or a form might support a regenerative pattern, but it doesn't guarantee one. Oftentimes, people ask me, well, should it be for-profit or non-profit? And I think that's a false dichotomy. I think it embodies the falsehood that the same organization can't produce both social and economic returns. So, you know, non-profit is one way to go, but there are certainly many types of, or at least several types of for-profit structures as well. Right after this session, I know we're going to learn more about steward ownership, which I also mentioned briefly during my talk. And this is a legal approach or a set of approaches to setting up for-profit businesses that where profit isn't the top priority. And the reason that's so important is that in our economic system, there is a deeply embedded ideal of shareholder primacy, which says that the purpose of a corporation or any for-profit business should be the maximization of shareholder returns. I think it's that assumption, that ideal of shareholder primacy, that perpetuates the extractive patterning. So I don't think profits in themselves are bad. It's just that they shouldn't be the primary dominant purpose of an organization. The one last, and I hope this has been kind of linear enough, the one last kind of structure I'll mention, so there's steward ownership. I also think that I think that cooperative ownership structures are very interesting. One of the examples I mentioned in my talk was Brooklyn Psychedelic Society, which is developing a cooperative ownership structure for psychedelic societies. And the reason that I think that structure holds so much appeal is that by its nature, it recirculates returns among multiple stakeholder groups. So anyway, so lots of different options. This is just, I guess that's just kind of a menu. And one of the, I guess just the very last thing I'll say, one of the resources that the Community Wellbeing Collaborative will provide is kind of a set of, kind of a handbook or a set of guides that outline how these different structures work, it's what some of the pros and cons of different structures are, to help entrepreneurs who are interested in starting a business with one of these aligned structures, help them to choose and implement the structure. So.
I love what you just said. First of all, most structures that are put in place to serve us end up driving us. So be careful what you pick, because it will shape you. And secondly, just because it's a nonprofit, and I've worked with some very large ones lately, doesn't mean they don't run like an investor-owned company. So you could be sanguine around all of that. I'm particularly interested in cooperative structures, and I'm thinking of the food security field where we've done a lot of work because they deliver complementary benefits. And as a funder, as a philanthropist, I'm always interested in things that produce multiple results. So cooperative structures, and we were using this a lot in food security, sourcing locally, hiring formerly incarcerated, who then have ownership, not just income, sourcing, supporting the community in wraparound ways. You start to find these complementary benefits for cooperative ownership structures that not only work for the business, but regenerate back into the community, returning community wealth, ownership, pride, connection, social capital.
Yeah, for sure. I'll just add one quick comment to that, which is that remember, if we think about communities as living systems, I think this idea is really consonant with that, because what you're talking about is reconceptualizing traditional employer-employee relationships, company-consumer relationships, and thinking about them in a much more multifaceted way, which again kind of goes well with the idea of a living system. So I'll leave it at that.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. We've talked a little bit today about the unknown, and that, this Oregon's the first in the nation to do this, and in America at least, this hasn't been done before. But there have been psilocybin services in other places, like say Jamaica or the Netherlands. So, the question just popped away. I'm going to try to remember what it was. The question was, do you know if there's anything that's been learned in those other places in terms of creating the kind of community-oriented businesses or pollinator approach or any of the things you guys have talked about today? Have we learned anything from how psilocybin's been rolled out in other places?
Well, I think, these efforts are very early, and I know that there are innovative organizations that are actively experimenting with different sorts of approaches. So I think it's a little bit too early to say. I think it's a little bit too early to draw major lessons from the psychedelic field. What I will say is that, we've been talking about how this is not just really about psilocybin. It's about shifting broader community level patterns. One of the case examples that I'm really fascinated with is the town of Frome, England, where they started treating loneliness as a medical condition.
Yes.
And whenever somebody came in complaining of a medical condition and also said they were lonely, they would be connected with somebody who was known as a community connector, whose job it would be to reconnect this person to different community organizations and community systems. They've been doing this for about 10 years, and in studies they found when they compare various health outcomes in Frome to those in neighboring counties, things like ER admission rates, hospital admission rates, and a number of other metrics. In Frome, they're about on the range of 20 to 40% better in relative terms compared to neighboring counties. So I think that, it's very hard to think of an intervention that has greater health benefits than that. So I think that we can draw lessons not just from the psychedelic field, but also from examples like Frome.
And I'll just draw a bit on not so much the international examples, but what we're doing in training psychedelic-assisted therapists at Naropa. First of all, we're rooting everything we do in contemplative practice. And so I think one of the things that we're learning is it matters to have the practitioner have the ability to be present. And to not be running their own thing while they're ostensibly paying attention. So the quality of active silence in the practitioner matters, and we've been teaching and cultivating that. Right use of power matters, right? We've seen these blurry lines, sexuality, dual relationships. It's blurry. It matters to do that, and it matters to consider power relationships, however they occur. Not time to go into it. We all know what they look like. Contemplative practice matters. Right use of power matters. And it matters that we begin with respect and dignity of everybody. I love thinking about the term respect. Look again. Look again. And these give us the basis for being worthy of sitting next to someone in their plant medicine. That's what we're learning.
Thank you so much, Tyler and Bennett. I was writing down, there are so many interesting questions that we just didn't have time to get to. I do hope you stick around and talk to some folks and stay for the cocktail reception, because this is such a compelling topic. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks.